Fox News contributor and British native Douglas Murray is in Israel now. He's getting a first-hand look at the Hamas atrocities, and he joins us live from Jerusalem. Good morning to you, Douglas. I've seen many of your reports and your television appearances throughout the week. You've done a great job of talking about what you've seen and distinguishing the moral moment in history that we have arrived at. I am curious, though, Douglas, I'm going to jump right into my curiosities with you. When you see London, and as you're expected to see Germany today, and maybe on a smaller scale, but we saw it here in New York as well, Columbus Circle, Grand Central Station. How do you explain what you're seeing in the West as a rally, as a celebration of as you have said, Douglas, not just pro-Palestinian, but in your estimation, indistinguishable from pro-Hamas rallies?
Well, we know that they're pro-Hamas. More than half of the organizers of the London protest yesterday have links with Hamas, as was reported in one of the national newspapers. So the idea that these are simply pro-peace rallies or something like that, it just doesn't hold up. And that's even before you go through the video of the crowds and of people calling for jihad or people calling from the river to the sea, which of course means the eradication of the state of Israel. Even before all that, it should be obvious what these marches in fact are. They're mainly made up of two groups of people. The majority are Muslims and people who of Muslim faith who always feel incredibly enraged whenever Israel is involved in a conflict and never come out on the streets when their fellow Muslims are being massacred in Yemen, Syria, or anywhere else. But there's also a sort of second and smaller group in these crowds, in Britain, in Berlin, as in America, which is a group of sort of far leftists who basically use this strange imposition of American recent interpretation of American history and put it onto the Middle East, which is why you hear people talking about colonialism and first peoples and much more. It's a real demonstration of incredible ignorance.
You know, you were obviously one of the people that's been talking for a long time about illegal immigration in Europe and sort of this displacement of Western values without having assimilated these massive amounts of people that came into the country, into the continent over the last, I don't know, 10 years. Are these protests in some way waking up the British people? Or is this sort of like, is there an acceptance that this is who we are now?
I think it is waking something up, but there's an enormous strategic problem, you see, which is the first people who turn out in protests against these protesters are already, rightly or wrongly, but it's a judgment call, described as far-right thugs and much more. And, of course, that means that much of the reporting from yesterday, for instance, refers to anyone who's patriotic and British who turns out against the Hamas protest. They're called far-right thugs. And all the Hamas supporters are described as peaceful protesters. So it's a totally upside-down world. But I do think that the reaction of the police to some of those counter-protesters yesterday, and the nature of some of those counter-protesters, is going to scare off a lot of other British people from appearing on the streets, turning out on the streets and saying, we just don't like this. So I've always had great faith in the American public to be able to turn out and counter terrorism on their streets and on our streets in America. But it's much, much more complex in Britain and in Europe, where people are just cowed, I think, into believing, we've sort of all got to get along somehow. And that includes the people who call for the eradication of the Jews. I mean, it's just lamentable that it should get to this.
Douglas, here in America, when we look at the protests that we see, I mean, there's an Ohio University professor who basically is supposed to be the professor of Islam and peace, and he's calling for the desolation of Israel, calling to get rid of it completely and very radical things. So when we see these protests here in our country, most of what we see are a lot of probably, a little bit of a stereotype here, middle-class white liberals that are under the age of 25. A lot of young kids in college being indoctrinated in some way that doesn't even have life context to apply to this issue. When we look at Europe, is it a similar thing? Is it an indoctrination from the university? Is it the young that are coming out and are more a canvas that's more easily painted? What are the demographics there?
To a great extent, it is, but it really is American education that has most failed people here, I think. British universities, all the problems they have, do not have the kind of indoctrination which has led us to see scenes as we have at university after university in the US. You know, after the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, Jewish students at US universities are the ones being hounded. I mean, how on earth did that happen? It's much worse, actually, in America at that level. In Germany, that would not be allowed, and there would be a much stronger response. I hope there's a strong response in America to this, too.
Yeah, you're right, Douglas, but I still think whether or not we're talking about Germany, France, the UK, or the US, there's this self-immolation, there's this apology for being the West. Yeah. Somebody's going to have to step up and champion the greatest set of values and civilization that the planet's ever seen. Somebody at some point is going to have to step up and champion the West. You know, Douglas, I want to jump right into some. First of all, you wrote the following in the New York Post. It's up right now. On a visit to Israel, I have seen the horror that the world must never forget. I know you've seen some of this footage, and I want to jump right into a debate. The viewers watching right now won't have the background on. You were on Piers Morgan, and you had this really, I think, a very interesting point. You weren't comparing atrocities nor soft-pedaling the atrocities of the Nazis, but you said even the Nazis doing what was so awful knew what they were doing to some extent was awful in that they tried to cover up their crimes, or their soldiers, and this is historically accurate, of the SS, had to do drugs and alcohol to get away with their own moral atrocities. And I'm not sure, I'm sure not all of them, but this was this is a historical fact. It's why they moved to the camps, because the soldiers became so destroyed from what they were doing. And you were comparing this to what you've seen in Israel right now, because you're saying Hamas is proud of what they did. There's no similar shame.
Yes, I mean, this is in no way, as you say, to soft pedal the atrocities of Nazism, but it is a curiosity of the Hamas videos and the footage they took that day, as well as the reaction of Hamas leaders since, that they are proud of what they've done. They are proud. If you see the unedited footage, as I sadly have, of the 7th of October attacks, never mind what you can gather from going to the kibbutzim again, the sites of the massacres that I have, you will know that an additional obscenity of what occurred and what Hamas wants to keep occurring is that the terrorists were so proud of what they were doing as they were doing it, calling their parents back in Gaza and saying, look, you know, father, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands, get mother on the line, I want to tell her how great her son is. I mean, you know, as I say, it's not to downplay any atrocities, but just to say, the world needs to realize that Hamas is not just a genocidal organization, a would-be genocidal organization, but one that actually relishes its barbarism and sadism. And I think that the world needs to realize that is the case.
I don't know what the takeaway from that is, but it is a stark and ugly reality. The minute I saw you say it, it's like, you're right. Like, what do we do with an organization that takes pride in what we just saw happen?
If we know anything for the last 2 decades, radical Islamic terror is a fire you just can't just stomp out.
Yeah, and I know the answer, by the way, to my own question. You destroy that organization. You destroy that ideology.
Douglas Murray, thank you for joining us.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.